The air in the Galactic Coalition Assembly Hall was thick and heavy, smelling faintly of ozone and ancient polished metal. Everything here was designed to make the visiting species feel small. The arches rose impossibly high, fading into a ceiling where artificial light pulsed like a slow, tired heart. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the dozens of alien forms seated in the tiered gallery. Most of them were members of the Krellian species, tall and spindly, with eyes that blinked sideways. Creatures who believed their culture was the final, perfect form of galactic civilization. At the very center, standing on a slightly raised disk, was the small human delegation. There were only 4 of them, and their leader, a diplomat named Claire, wore a simple gray suit. She addressed Ambassador Krell, who loomed on the central dais, his voice amplified to fill the massive space. Krell's voice was a low, steady drone that felt more like a physical pressure on the chest than a sound. "The verdict is unanimous," Krell declared, his clawed hand resting on a glowing data slate. "For centuries, Noel Krell's fear has been a center of chaos. Your growth is too fast, your internal conflicts too loud, your technology too unpredictable. You refuse to accept the established pace. You disrupt the peace and create instability." Claire listened without moving. Her face showed no anger and no fear. She was simply attentive, like a student waiting for a grade she already knew. "Therefore," Krell continued, the word echoing off the chamber walls, "by the authority of the Galactic Coalition, and in accordance with Articles 7 and 9 of the Stellar Stability Treaty, Earth and all associated human colonies are officially exiled. All regulated trade, protective pacts, and technological exchange are terminated. You are to withdraw your vessels from all regulated space within 100 standard solar days. Failure to comply will be met with overwhelming force." A visible ripple went through the alien audience. They expected shouting. They expected a desperate plea for reconsideration, or perhaps a sharp, angry protest, the kind of noisy, emotional response that was so typical of the small, loud human species. This was meant to be the moment of their humiliation, a final lesson in respecting their elders. Krell himself leaned forward slightly, ready to dismiss any argument. But Claire simply let out a slow breath. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a challenging sneer. It was a genuine, slow, quiet smile, like someone who had just won a difficult game of strategy that everyone else had missed. It did not match the grimness of the moment at all. "We accept the terms," Claire said clearly, her voice surprisingly steady, though not amplified. "Humanity will not disrupt your peace any longer. We are gone." Krell blinked his third eyelids in confusion. He had prepared for a complex negotiation to finalize the details of their withdrawal. He had not prepared for this immediate, strangely peaceful surrender, especially one that looked so much like a victory for the human. He merely nodded, perplexed, and ended the session abruptly. 5,000 miles away, deep under the churning black surface of the Pacific Ocean, Engineer Ben wiped sweat from his forehead. The room around him hummed with power, a low, constant vibration that had been the background noise of his life for the past 7 years. This wasn't a surface shipyard or a military base. It was the core of a vessel so large and complex it had been built section by section, hidden from every satellite and spy drone you human had ever launched. The chamber walls were lined with heavy steel and insulation, masking the light and sound of the true work. "Final systems check Mark II drive," Ben muttered into his headset, ignoring the stinging in his eyes from the long hours. He wasn't looking at the glowing consoles. He was looking through a thick viewport at a massive, intricate structure in the center of the chamber. This was the folding engine, the technology that had been the real reason, the Krellian Coalition's fear, and the focus of years of secret human effort. "Power levels are nominal, Ben," replied a voice over the intercom. "We are ready for the core initiation sequence." Ben took a deep breath, his heart beating against his ribs like a motor trying to escape. "We are ready for leave," he said quietly, and then to his medical team, "All systems go. We are going for the initiation." The engine, the physical actual model, was not bigger than anything you had ever built. It was only a tiny steel core, but this was the precedent for another dimension. Back in the Alien Council, the verdict had been given, and Claire was still smiling. Her message to the group: "Ability is your choice, Ambassador. Your stagnation is your problem. Our new folding drive is not messy, it is just fast, and it is not for sale or for sharing." She looked Krell directly in the eye. "We found that the only way for humanity to truly advance was to leave you behind. We wish you and the Coalition well in your slow, safe galaxy. We have a universe to build." Then the small human vessel and Claire's image vanished instantly. Krell sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of his large, slow ship and the large, slow empire it represented. He had not forced humanity out. He had simply unlocked their true potential. He had exiled them, and humanity had smiled and left them behind for good. Krell knew then that the Coalition's crisis was only just beginning, and humanity was already gone forever, beyond his reach and beyond his time.
The alien spy ship watched the humans go. It was a long, black vessel that held still in the darkness, waiting. Commander Nihilus, the alien in charge of the observation post, looked at his sensor screens with bored certainty. He was waiting for the humans to fail. He expected to see their ships fight or run out of fuel or simply lose their way in the vast, cold emptiness of unmapped space. His crew members, all Krellian, were equally calm. They had been watching the human withdrawal for 3 weeks. The human fleet was slow and old. The vessels relied on basic fusion drives, the heavy, basic engines that the Coalition had allowed them to build. They moved at a frustratingly predictable speed, a slow crawl toward the official border of regulated space. "Report on Terran behavior," Nihilus ordered, adjusting his spindly legs under the control panel. "Still compliant, Commander," replied an officer. "Perfect formation. No distress signals. All vessels are maintaining standard power output. It is unnerving, sir. They move with the precision of a clockwork toy." Nihilus found it deeply strange. Humans were famous for their loud, messy exits. They were known for shouting and protesting until the very last second. But this fleet was silent. It was led by Claire's diplomatic vessel, the Pax, which moved at the front like a quiet gray shield. Behind it, hundreds of ships, some cargo haulers, some colony vessels, and a few small old warships, all held their places perfectly. There was no sign of panic or haste. The boundary line was an invisible, cold frontier in space. It was marked only by the change in the navigational beacon frequencies. As the lead human ship, the Pax, approached this final line, Commander Nihilus felt a surge of professional anticipation. This was the point where the humans would surely make one last desperate attempt to turn back or plead. The Pax crossed the line. The moment the last piece of the lead ship passed the invisible barrier, the event began. It was not loud, it was not slow, it was instantaneous. Nihilus's screens went from displaying a calm, slow-moving column of ships to a blinding, chaotic mess. Instead of the usual long, stretched-out light trail of an authorized warp jump, a slow, visible stutter that took minutes to complete, there was only a contained flash of pure white-blue energy. It happened to every single ship at the exact same moment. It was as if someone had flicked a cosmic switch and then erased the ships from reality. "What was that?" Nihilus demanded, pushing his chair back. His voice was no longer bored. It was sharp with alarm. "Sensors are registering an anomaly, Commander," the officer shouted, tapping wildly at his console. "Energy signature is massive, off the charts, but it lasted for only 0.04 seconds. It was not a drive signature we recognize. It was a fold, a spatial collapse, localized." "Where are they?" The officer shook his head, his wide Krelian eyes spinning sideways in distress. "They are gone, Commander. The ships are not here. No residual warp bubble, no debris, nothing but a cooling residue of unknown energy." Nihilus leaned over the console, staring at the empty blackness where hundreds of human ships had been just a moment before. He had expected their slow, predictable destruction. Instead, they had simply vanished instantly and completely, moving with a clean speed that no Coalition vessel possessed. "Log this event immediately," Nihilus instructed, trying to keep his voice level. "Log the energy signature and the speed of disappearance. Destination, unknown. Note that this type of maneuver violates all known principles of approved faster-than-light travel." Miles beneath the now empty Pacific, Engineer Ben watched the final energy reading drop back to 0. He had just seen the readouts confirming the entire fleet had successfully jumped. It was a massive victory of physics over bureaucracy. "It worked," he whispered, a huge relieved grin spreading across his face. "The Mark II drive worked." The ship around him, the massive hidden core vessel they had built, was now silent, the energy redirected back to its main reactor. They were staying behind for a few hours, completing the final steps of covering their tracks and destroying all remaining data that referenced the folding engine. "The Exile fleet is through, Ben," confirmed a voice from his operations team. "Claire sends a simple message. The party is over. She is asking for confirmation that we are performing the final cleanup here." "Confirm," Ben replied, standing tall. "Scuttle the habitat systems. Initiate the long decay sequence on the reactor. We are leaving nothing that could be traced back to the drive. Let them think we used up all our resources just to get away." He thought of Commander Nihilus and the other aliens watching from the boundary line. They were seeing a fleet of old, slow ships performing an impossible disappearing act. They were seeing the last sign of humanity, and they would have absolutely no idea where they went or how they did it. The Coalition Council received the report from Nihilus hours later. They read the data on the massive brief energy spike and the inexplicable vanishing act. Ambassador Krell, now restored to his full rank and standing, looked at the report with cold disdain. "The Terrans are gone. Their primitive, uncontrolled experiments have finally led to their own destruction," he pronounced, dismissing the strange sensor readings. "A massive, uncontrolled energy discharge that resulted in the complete destruction of their fleet. A shame, perhaps, but the galaxy is now stable. The exile has been enforced. We shall speak of the chaotic Terran element no more." The Galactic Coalition believed they had won their long political war. They believed they had forced humanity into a suicidal dash into the void. They felt safe, stable, and justified. As the vast, quiet council hall settled back into its routine of slow, careful deliberation, no one realized that the real story had just begun, and that humanity had not been forced out, but simply smiled and left them behind.
5 years passed in the regulated space of the Galactic Coalition like 5 slow, quiet breaths. Everything was stable. Everything was predictable. Ambassador Krell, now a celebrated figure for enforcing the Terran exile, enjoyed his high position. The Coalition ships moved on their usual slow trade routes. Meetings were scheduled months in advance. New technology was released only after decades of slow, careful testing and committee approval. It was a time of perfect, peaceful stagnation. The Coalition was safe, but they were also still. They believed they had won their peace by getting rid of the noisy, unpredictable humans. Meanwhile, a great distance away, the human story was moving at a frightening speed. The Exile fleet had landed in a massive, dense nebula, a cloud of glowing gas and dust that the Coalition's outdated maps had marked as simply too dangerous. This place, which the humans now called New Haven, was rich with raw materials and untouched energy sources. It was also completely outside the regulated zones. Here, under the vibrant swirls of blue and gold cosmic clouds, humanity had finally started to breathe. Engineer Ben, the man who designed the folding drive, stood on the observation deck of the primary station. The station itself was not a fixed structure. It was constantly growing and reshaping itself like a busy living machine. Ben watched the work below. Instead of waiting for slow supply convoys, automated fabrication machines built new housing units and research labs in a matter of days. What took the coalition 20 years to design and authorize, the humans built in 2. Another 5% gain on the stellar array efficiency ban, reported a young technician named Maya. She was barely 20 years old, but she was in charge of the entire energy grid for the main orbital ring. Excellent, Ben replied, nodding. We are already running at 300% of our old energy capacity. Use the excess power immediately. Route it to the deep space mining rigs. We need more metals for the generational habitat. Ben understood that the greatest power humanity had was not its engines, but its impatience. The coalition was afraid to fail. Humans were afraid to stop. Every failed experiment simply led to a faster correction. They didn't have to worry about alien laws, patents, or sharing their designs. Every discovery was immediately put into use. They no longer used those slow, heavy fusion drives. Now every small cargo shuttle and even the worker drones used miniature cold fusion reactors, devices the coalition had banned as too volatile 40 years ago. Now they were just power sources for building materials. The speed of change was happening in government. Claire, the diplomat who smiled at the verdict, was now the coordinator of the Terran free worlds. She didn't lead a slow, dusty bureaucracy. She led a group of elected specialists who held daily, simple meetings focused only on 2 things. What is the current biggest problem, and what is the fastest way to fix it? We solved the food production issue last month, Claire told a newly arrived delegation of settlers. Now, our focus is health and life extension. We need 500 more medical specialists to staff the new research hubs on Planet 4. The government was not about making fixed laws. It was about constant, efficient problem solving. It was fast, it was loud, and it changed its rules every few months. But it worked perfectly for the humans. Life in New Haven was challenging, but everyone had purpose, and everyone knew that their effort today would result in a huge technological leap tomorrow. 5 years had erased a century of stagnation. The humans had built a small but extremely potent defense fleet. These ships were not large, but they were almost impossible to hit, moving with the impossible speed provided by the folding technology. They were silent guardians, built not to attack, but to make it very clear that this new home was protected by technology the coalition could not even dream of. Humanity was no longer looking back at Earth or the petty squabbles of the coalition. They were looking outward, across the vastness of the galaxy, planning their next, even bigger move. They had been given the greatest gift, the freedom to evolve, unburdened by the slow fear and tradition of others. The exile was the beginning, not the end, and the humans were already light years ahead.
5 more years crawled by for the Galactic Coalition. The time was peaceful, just as Ambassador Krell had promised. But peace, Krell learned, did not mean easy. Because everything moved so slowly and so carefully, fixing anything became nearly impossible. The biggest problem was the FTL system. The Coalition used a massive network of heavy, permanent jump gates to move ships across the galaxy. These gates were old, complex machines, and they required constant, slow, and expensive maintenance. 7 years after the humans were exiled, one of the most important jump gates, called the Nexus Gate, simply stopped working. It was not a quick fix. Because the Coalition was so used to slow, safe procedures, the process of finding the problem took a year, designing the fix took 2 more, and building the rare parts needed took another 2 years after that. The galactic trade lines choked. Shipments of vital resources were delayed by years. The stability Krell had created turned into a heavy, grinding bottleneck. The smaller species in the Coalition grew angry. Their leaders began to complain that stability meant slow death. They remembered how the humans, loud as they were, had often come up with simple, messy fixes for similar problems in days. They had been impatient, but they had also been fast. Ambassador Krill, once the hero of the exile, now faced sharp questions. He needed a way to restore faith and, more importantly, a quick technological advantage. He remembered the strange, impossible vanishing of the human fleet. Krell had officially declared its self-destruction, but deep down, the sensor readings from Commander Nihilus always bothered him. He decided to send a single, silent probe into the unmapped void, the area where the human fleet had disappeared. Krell didn't admit it, but he hoped the humans had simply crashed, leaving behind some useful piece of their strange folding technology that the Coalition could reverse engineer to fix the jump gate. The scout ship chosen for the secret mission was the Custodian. It was a standard, long-range Krellian vessel, slow and heavy, designed for observation. Its pilot was a young Krellian named Tallow, who had no desire to go near the dangerous nebula marked on the old maps. "You will fly the designated path, Tallow," Krell told him sternly through a holoscreen. "Do not engage any foreign life signs. Simply look for debris. Look for a crash site. If you find anything of value, mark its position and return immediately. This is an operation of the highest secrecy." Tallow flew for many months. The journey was long and boring, following the slow, safe warplanes until they reached the edge of the Coalition's official boundary. Then he had to switch to sublight engines, flying for weeks through the dark, cold vacuum. Finally, Tallow reached the coordinates of the Too Dangerous Nebula. He slowed the Custodian to a near stop, preparing his long-range scanners to look for broken metal and frozen bodies. But he found no wreckage. Instead, Tallow found light. The nebula was no longer a cold, dark void. It was a massive, glowing jewel box of cosmic light and color. And nestled within the clouds, Tallow saw structure. They were not small temporary habitats. They were colossal, intricate orbital rings and towers of metal and glass that stretched for hundreds of miles. These were not the signs of a crashed civilization. They were the signs of an empire being built. The structures pulsed with clean, white-blue energy. Tallow gasped. He stared at his sensors, which screamed with readings of immense power generation in traffic. Tiny, bright ships moved between the giant rings with speeds that seemed to break the laws of physics Tallow knew. They did not leave long, stretched warp trails. They simply appeared and disappeared instantly. It can't be wreckage. It is a civilization, and it is huge. He reluctantly followed his last order from Krell: send an inquiry signal. It was a standard, long-form Coalition message, polite but slow, requesting permission to enter the area. The response was not a heavy reply from a main station. It was instant. A tiny, silvery object, no bigger than Tallow's hand, shot from the nearest orbital ring. It covered the distance of 100,000 miles in less than 5 seconds, appearing almost instantly next to the Custodian's bridge window. The drone hovered there completely silent, its small blue thrusters barely flickering. Tallow stared in pure fear at the speed of the thing. His own scout ship would have taken 4 days to cover that distance, but this tiny device had crossed it faster than he could blink. The drone had a single, optical lens focused on Tallow. Then, the drone's tiny speaker crackled to life, delivering a message in perfect, clear Krellian. "You are attempting to enter the space of the Terran free worlds. Your ship's engine signature is known to us. Please state your business slowly." The voice was calm, female, and utterly powerful. Tallow, looking at the incomprehensible speed of the small drone and the vastness of the new human civilization behind it, felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He suddenly knew that the Coalition had made the biggest mistake in history.
Ambassador Krell sat in the central chamber of the Galactic Coalition Assembly, listening to Tallow's report. The room, which 10 years earlier had been filled with the sound of Krell's pride, was now silent with disbelief. Tallow, the young pilot of the scout ship, looked tired and very nervous, pointing to the images on the large screen. The screen showed the massive, complex orbital rings of the Terran-free worlds, glowing with immense energy in the colorful nebula. Commander Nihilus was correct 10 years ago, Talo finished, his voice shaking slightly. The humans did not crash. They just jumped. They used a technology we do not have to move their entire civilization to this new place. And in the 5 years since then, they have built something huge. Their defense technology is fast and silent. They are completely self-sufficient. Krell refused to accept it. This is a lie, he hissed. But the data logs from Talo's sensors were too clean, too precise. They showed energy readings that should not exist and speeds that were impossible. The coalition leaders, slow to anger but quick to fear, now looked at Krell with deep concern. The Nexus Gate was still broken. Trade was nearly stopped, and the coalition's stability was failing because of its own slowness. Krell realized that the answer to his crisis was right there on the screen, hidden in the neon glow of the Terran-free worlds. He needed their technology. He needed the folding drive Ben had invented. "Prepare the main diplomatic vessel," Krell commanded, his voice strained. "I will travel to the edge of the Terran-free worlds myself. We will remind them of their obligations to the galaxy." The journey was long and humiliating. Krell had to use the same heavy, slow warp drive that he had always authorized for the Coalition. It took him 2 full months just to reach the boundary of the dangerous nebula. His ship, the Dignity, was large and slow, a symbol of the old, heavy ways. When they reached the designated point, Krell waited. He saw the shimmering light of the massive human civilization inside the clouds. After an hour, a small, elegant human vessel appeared. It was clearly a defense ship, and it moved with a casual speed that made Krell's own ship look like a rock floating in water. A few moments later, Claire, the human diplomat who had smiled at the verdict 10 years ago, appeared on the main screen in Krell's bridge. She looked exactly the same, still wearing a simple, tailored suit. Her face was calm, and her eyes held a very slight but unmistakable, knowing look. "Ambassador Krell," Claire said pleasantly, "welcome to the border of the Terran-free worlds. This is a restricted zone. You are far from home." Krell leaned forward, forcing dignity back into his voice. "Diplomat Claire, I have come to discuss the current crisis in the Nexus Gate. As former members of the Coalition, humanity has a moral duty to share the technology that can correct this failure. We demand your assistance. You were only exiled, not forgotten." Claire listened patiently, her hands folded neatly. When Krell finished, she paused for a long moment, looking past him as if she were thinking about a very distant memory. "Ambassador," Claire finally replied, her voice soft but firm. "I must remind you of your own words from 10 years ago. You said the Terran sphere was a center of chaos, too loud, too unpredictable, and that we must be removed to secure galactic stability." She paused again, and that strange, quiet smile returned, growing wider this time. "You, Ambassador, gave us the greatest gift we could ever receive, freedom from your stability. You removed all trade laws, all patent restrictions, all limitations on our science, and all your safety rules. You forced us to solve our own problems without your slow, heavy permission. We used that gift. We are no longer the species you exiled. We are the Terran-free worlds, and we will not be coming back." Krell felt a burning pressure behind his eyes. "You violate the spirit of the Stellar Stability Treaty." "The treaty no longer applies to us," Claire stated simply. "You exiled us from the treaty. We are free. And your stability is your choice, Ambassador. Your stagnation
is your problem. Our new folding drive is not messy, it is just fast, and it is not for sale or for sharing. She looked Krell directly in the eye. We found that the only way for humanity to truly advance was to leave you behind. We wish you and the Coalition well in your slow, safe galaxy. We have a universe to build. Then the small human vessel and Claire's image vanished instantly. Krell sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of his large, slow ship and the large, slow empire it represented. He had not forced humanity out. He had simply unlocked their true potential. He had exiled them, and humanity had smiled and left them behind for good. Krell knew that the Coalition's crisis was only just beginning, and humanity was already gone forever, beyond his reach and beyond his time.